There's a tool buried deep in the Unreal Engine's source code that allows you to create branching conversations with choices, side effects, and pretty much any logic you wish, using a simple built-in graph editor. But nobody seems to be talking about it. Let's fix that. Okay, let's see if I can explain to you how to use this package. I think the main thing that people will want to do with this is just show some text to the user through a widget, and the common conversation package itself does not come with functionality for that. It's just like a backend for it. So what I'm showing you is basically how to add a front end to it. Now let's get out of the way all the requirements that you need to run common conversations. The first of which is you will need to install and use game features. Game feature is a system that Epic made to develop basically mods for your games, whatever. The important thing is that the conversation plugin is dependent on the life cycle of game feature, and all the conversation that you make will be loaded only when a game feature is loaded. So you need to install, activate this plugin and put all your conversation assets inside a game feature that you create. There's tons of tutorials for that on the internet. I'm not gonna explain how to do that here. Then, coffee. Once you've done that, you need to point your asset manager to find your conversation databases. So asset manager, you see you can add it here. I do not think that adding a specific assets like I've done is required, but I've had this this thing here since I've started using common conversation. It works. I also cooked builds with this. It just worked. Maybe it works without. I'm pretty sure it should work without, but I haven't tested it. That's up to you to experiment with. Now, so the central point are these conversation databases, which are data assets. So you go create data asset, conversation database here. Once you create it, you get this like graph editor, and here you can place all your nodes. Basically, here is where you're gonna place your conversation. You start from an entry point. This entry point needs to be tagged, as we have already seen, and this is how you will be able to tell to the system, okay, start from here. Now, let's set up two actors so they can talk to each other. So I've chosen my hero, my player, and another character, which is Emo from the project I'm working on. He's a lovely guy. The only thing you need to do here is to add a participant component. I have added here a slightly modified version of the base component that comes with the plugin, which allows me to specify an entry point for this specific character and some data that is related to it, so that I can show like an avatar image. I can set here their name, and I can give them a tag. So once you've done this on at least two characters, of which one should be your hero or your player, you're good to go. These two guys are now ready to talk. The next thing we need is a widget to display the conversation. This widget is a sample widget that I created. You can find this exact one in my plugin, but you can create a widget yourself. As you can see, it's set up to show a name, the image of the character talking, the text, and a choice for the user. Here you can progress to the next message. The interesting thing of this widget is all in these two functions, conversation updated and conversation ended. These are the functions that I hooked up into the common conversation system, and if you want to see how, it's here. So you can see this is a standard common activatable widget. Go figure out what that is. It's basically a user widget. You can use a user widget if you want. And this is following the assumption I'm making with my implementation, which is that your player pawn is in charge of displaying the UI. So I make the assumption that you only need to show UI to someone, to your player, if you have a player character or a player pawn in this case. And so in the native construct, I checked if I already have a widget, conversation component set. If not, I'm finding the pawn from the owning player, make sure that it's there. And from there, I get the conversation component. Then I set it, and then I hook it up into the conversation system using these two events that are handily already declared for us. This is the vanilla participant component, and as you see, there are actually a bunch of methods that you can subscribe to. I've subscribed to conversation updated and status changed. This is everything I need. And to those two, I basically hooked up those two functions on conversation updated and status changed that you have here. These are blueprint implementable events, which means we can add all the logic we want in Blueprint now. Little thing that I think is worth noticing, the conversation updated receives a payload, which is a struct of structs, but basically this is where you will find all the information for each message that you need to show. Here you can see you receive a message with the speaker ID, the tag, basically of the participant that's speaking, its name, the text, and then I also want to use the avatar image, which I'm getting from the participant data thingy that I hooked up to my component. With this information, I proceed to update the text. Very simple, just add the stuff here so it shows what it needs to show, and optionally add a conversation option. We'll see this in a second. On conversation ended, we deactivate the widget. Now let's see how to start a conversation. You do that using a very handy Blueprint function library. This thing is included, as you can see, in the base plugin. It requires a few things to work. An entry tag. This entry tag is what will identify our entry point node, the instigator and target, which are the two actors that are going to converse, and optionally, I believe it's optionally, I'm fairly sure, two tags to identify them. You don't strictly need to set these two tags, but if you do, then you will have, your life will be easier to reference your actor and make them do things from within the conversation nodes. And that's it. You don't need to pass in a conversation instance class. The one that is included in the package is just fine. Oh, I was forgetting. Just before starting the conversation, in my implementation, I push the widget. This widget here, you see, is the conversation widget base, which is this guy here, to the viewport. So I do that, and then I start the conversation. That's why I don't need to hook up to the on conversation start event. But that's just my choice. You can do as you please. So now we basically have everything we need to start a conversation, except our graph is pretty much empty. So let's give it an entry point. I'll use my demo entry point, and let me immediately make sure that he's hooked up to that one. It's already there. Okay, cool. And now we need to show stuff. We need to do things. The main node that I'm going to show you, the most important one, is a node that will allow us to send some data to our widget, basically. For that, we will use a task node. You can create it by going up here, selecting conversation task node. It will be prompted, give it a name, and save it somewhere. I have one already made. It's super simple. As you see, it creates a conversation message payload. It's basically what we are receiving here. That struct of struct of struct of struct. You pass it the speaker ID, you pass it a message. These two are made editable. Here, you see, instance editable, so you can basically assign them from here. You pass it a reference to the current node. This is needed by the system, and then you use the context to issue commands to the conversation instance. So this context is available with every task node you create, and it is another bridge to the conversation instance. It allows you to do a lot of things. All these methods are, I believe, methods on the conversation instance. And among those methods, we will use the pause conversation and send client choices. Why this one? Well, because this one will allow us to stop executing all the graph and wait for the widget to tell us, okay, now you can proceed. So basically, if you use this node, we are then in charge of tell the conversation system, hey, we can proceed to the next node. That function in my setup is relegated to the widget itself. It's this button here. This button here is added on every time we are updating the conversation. We are adding options, which are again options that the user can choose. As you can see, if there are no options, I just add one to end the conversation. If there are options, instead I add them to the screen in the form of a button. And this button here, it's very simple, a button. And the only relevant thing it does here is get the owning player and the pawn that's being controlled by it to grab the conversation component. Remember, the conversation component is a bridge to the conversation instance. The conversation instance is the director. Now we have the conversation instance. We can request to advance the conversation. And we add in optionally the option that this button represents. This one. And that's that. So let's use this node prompt message. Here it is. We give it a very creative message. Hello there. We give it a speaker ID. Emo. And now, just with this, it should work. Boom! Of course, like the only part that I'm not showing you is like the interaction between the character and Emo here, which is handled in my case by a gameplay ability, whatever. This is where I start the conversation basically. Upon interaction, all of this logic fires. And it picks the entry point that is on the NPC you're interacting with, on its participant component. And that's basically it in a nutshell. You can add more of these nodes if you want. Hello there, etc. And it will keep showing all the messages until the end of time, until you define them. But let's see now something a bit more involved. Let's say that at some point we want to branch this conversation into two and give two options to the user. So let's create the branch. Say that in one case we say, where are you? And in the other case we say, okay. So to add a choice, there is a system pre-built in, like it works exactly as decorating nodes for a behavior tree. You click here and you can add a choice. This is built in, so you add a choice here and we can call this choice skip. And this one, whatever, really, I don't know. Go on. So now we have this branching situation, and for how we've set up things, our system is already set up to show these choices, because these options will be passed as a payload here. They will be available here, and this system already loops through every option and shows them as buttons. So let's see. Hello there. Danger from my nightmare, skip to the interesting part or go on. Boom. And you can check the other one. Super simple. As I told you, like once you hook it up, this system is handy and it works well. There are two more things that we haven't talked about, the requirements and the side effect. So let's see the requirement. This is another basically decorator. So let's say that instead of choices, we want to base the decision of going to either of these nodes based on something else. Let's say on whether you have an item on your inventory. So you can create a requirement. You do the same here, create conversation requirement node. Boom, you create one. As you might have seen, spoiler, I already created one for the inventory check. Let's go and check that out. And here it is. So you get one function that you can override, is requirement satisfied, get it here. You also get access to the context and so to the conversation instance. And what's important here is the return node. The return node can have three different values: past, failed but visible, failed and hidden. I have no idea what failed but visible is required for. Past means that the node that this requirement is decorating will be considered as valid. Failed and hidden, it will not be considered as valid. So in my case, I am checking if the player controller has a specific item, which you can specify here. It's instance editable, so this can be specified from the graph. And based on that, I'm returning the appropriate value. Now I'm doing some trickery with the invert boolean here, and I will show you why in a second. So let's say that here we say you have the item, and here we say for you do not have the item. We add a requirement, our inventory check, and we need to add it to both. Or at least I haven't found another way to deal with it yet. I think there might be a smarter way to do this, but I didn't find it. Okay, first of all, let's pick an item that we want. Key second floor is fine by me. If you have the item, then this requirement will pass. Let's say we don't decorate this. This is available by default, and this is available because it passes the check. So at that point you have ambiguity. The conversation could flow both here and here. And so that's where that invert thing kicks in. So basically I want to say that if we have the item, we flow here normally, but if we don't, then don't flow here. And just like that, I created the item here handily. This is the key second floor. Let's try to go there without the item. Poor you. Now let's get the item. You have the item. And that's that. And again, I think you can... I think if you just sit down and think about this, you'll find better solutions than this, but this works. You do you. Okay, the last thing that remains to show is the side effect node. This is another type of node that you can use to decorate your tasks, and it basically allows you to execute additional logic on top of what you are executing in the task. Now, I have not found a use for this yet, and I actually find their behavior weird. The reason for that is that they seem to be executing at least twice. So this is the code that executes the task node, the side effect. And you can see it here is it's executing the side effect once, but then for each participant, it executes the side effects again, which means that according to how many participants you have in the conversation, this side effect keeps executing, like one time per each participant, which is, I don't know if that's intended and I don't understand how to use this. Whatever, it's what it is. I'll just show it to you. Then maybe you'll find what's the purpose of this logic and you'll tell me in a comment. You create it going to this menu, create conversation side effect node. We'll create one together. Let's click save. Once here, you have an option to override two functions, one for the client and one for the server. If you do it on the client, you get even more executions. So I will just do in the server for now. Let's just print out something. And then that's it. Oh yeah, we need to hook it up. Let's say that we want to execute it in the case we have the item. So we have the side effect, we pick the side effect we just created. And then pick the item, talk to Elmo, and hello Elmo, twice. Why? I don't know. But this is it. This is everything I have figured out about this plugin. I think overall it's pretty cool. And yeah, good luck with your conversations, guys. Fabrizio, out.